Jessica and her accomplishments. Ray Charles was singing to us, and she held the Ray Charles Chair at Dillard University. I have to be very careful when I speak about Jessica because she is a professor of English for 50 years, and she will tell me, 48 years, and she will tell me that I did not put my sentences together correctly, but I will do my best, Jessica. If you read the Boston Globe or Essence Magazine or New York Times, they will tell you that this particular book that she's written is one of the must-reads for the summer. I certainly found it to be so. Jessica is one of the curators. Oh, you're holding the book? Good. One of the curators at the Smithsonian National African American Museum in the cafeteria. If you have the pleasure to go to the Smithsonian, the food that you'll be tasting in there was curated by Jessica. That's the kind of juice my girl has. She does all kinds of things, and I'm not going to say too much more about her, except that I am proud that she's my friend, and I hope that you will understand that and her relationship with James Baldwin. Thank you.
Good evening. This comes under the heading of what was actually the title of the autobiography of a girlfriend of mine, which is, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I actually had seen the Baldwin film before, and when I said yes, when Gretchen said, would you come and speak after the film because you knew Baldwin, I forgot that my reaction to the Baldwin film was, and I saw it with two friends of mine, when I left, I said, don't say a word. I do not want to talk about this. I need a drink. And that's pretty much where I suspect, particularly those of you who have seen it for the first time, are. You may not need the drink, but you may need the moment. So while I organize myself and compose myself, you take that moment and think about it, and think about the film, and think about how astonishingly, heartbreakingly, incredibly oracular Baldwin was. First of all, I need to start this by saying, they say Q&A, if you ask a question, I'm going to shrink and disappear before your very eyes. I am not a Baldwin scholar. I am an academic, but I am an academic whose background is so checkered and peculiar. I usually tell people I am spread so thinly you can read through me. My degrees are in French and theater. My doctoral dissertation is on the French-speaking theater of Senegal. My major was French. I therefore write cookbooks and teach English. So you get the general idea. Okay. While we're getting organized and while I am still composing myself while my mouth is running, most of what forms this film occurred in the 1960s. The Baldwin images that you see, the clips from the various shows, the Dick Cavett show, all of those things that were on television back then. I met Baldwin in the 1970s. I had an incredible privilege of spending time with him. I knew it. I knew it then, and I certainly know it now. If I had known the intimacy and urgency of the Baldwin of the 60s that we see in the film, and I did not, I would have been even more daunted, even more terrified, even smaller, shrunk down in my seat every time I was with him. That said, I had the great good fortune to know him and to be able to call him Jimmy, and I owed that good fortune to another person who was a colleague of mine at Queens College, And I'm going to read to you a little bit from this book that has been much with me. Let me just leave it at that. And this is the prologue. My man is black, golden, amber, changing, warm mouths of brandy, fiend. So opens Maya Angelou's poem to a man. If I'd read those lines back in the 1970s, this story would never have happened. Instead, ignorant, trusting, believing in love, and woefully too young, I raced in. I've been rereading Angelou's poetry recently because her passing has brought memories of my youth vividly back, like Léon Damas's long-held-in hiccup. And if you're not familiar with Léon Damas, he is one of the founders of the Negritude movement. He's a French poet from Guyana, like Guyane Française, and he wrote a poem about his extraordinarily aspirational middle-class upbringing in Guyana as he was growing up in Guyane, where he referred to his mother's reminding him about table manners and piano lessons, and how every time he tried to react against them, it returned as a hiccup. So that's the hiccup that I refer to. And those memories I relive again and again. I've been known to say that I am the Zelig of the second half of the 20th century because it has been my great good fortune to turn up in multiple special spots. I lived and studied in Paris when the Halles was still going strong and the buildings were gray. I've supped with Sembène in Senghor, Senegal, and I've danced in the Candomblé ring in Jorge Amado's Bahia. However, the real reason that I identify with the Woody Allen character is that it was a privilege to spend a part of my youth with Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, and their circles of friends as they were becoming icons of 20th century America. Their joys in one another, the fierceness of their intellectual pursuits, and their absolute dedication to civil rights and to the righting of civil wrongs of all sorts made their names hallmarks of honesty and totems for truth that influenced the world. I am not central to the story, although I have lived it. Rather, it is about an extraordinary circle of friends who came together, lived outrageously, loved abundantly, laughed uproariously, and savored life while they created work that would come to define the era. That they knew one another was interesting. That they partied together, savored one another's company, encouraged one another's endeavors, celebrated one another's achievements, and mourned one another's losses is extraordinary. This tale is also the tale of a city, New York City. Its neighborhoods and its vibrant life is also a character, for no other place in the world could have spawned and celebrated their lives with such intensity. Paris had La Belle Époque, the 1920s, and the existentialist 1950s. London had the swinging 60s, and New York City in the early 1970s was the hub of the universe city. It was a city in the throes of a major transition when restaurants could offer a glimpse into the fading world of cafe society or bubble with the excitement of the new era that was being created. And the clubs that existed for every possible social stripe throbbed nightly with the excesses of the sexual and moral revolution that had been ushered in the 1960s. Life was lived in widescreen technicolor in ways that had never before existed. It was the city before AIDS and economic downturns made it a very different place. Memory has muted some of the vibrancy of the colors, and the dates fade into a continuum, but the vitality of the friendships, the commitment to activism, and the joie de vivre of those heady days remain as palpable as the intertwined connective tissue of the lives that were lived then. James Baldwin was at the center of this circle of friends. His huge presence radiated warmth and intensity. His cultural and political stature at that point in time was enormous. Through my eyes, my young eyes, being in Baldwin's circle, however tangentially, felt at times as though we were all in attendance at the court of a very reluctant Sun King. Although the group was egalitarian, there was an unspoken hierarchy, and everybody kind of knew where they fit in. If Baldwin was the pivot of the literary court, his trusted second was a gentleman, and a gentleman from Durham, North Carolina, named Samuel Clemens Floyd III, Angelou's Amber Sam. Floyd's name's literary allusion to Mark Twain was prescient, for Sam had been one of the early black writers on staff at Newsweek, and was the director of faculty and curriculum and taught English in the Higher Education Opportunity Program, SEEK, S-E-E-K, at Queens College, where I also worked and still work. Like Candomblé Orisha Ogun, breaker of bonds who clears paths and builds roads, it was Sam who opened the way into the circle of friends for me and led me down the rabbit hole into the wonderland that was that moment in time. And I'm going to read you 2 first meetings, and then I'm going to look at my watch and see if there's time. This is my first well, I'd met Baldwin before, but this is my meeting Baldwin at his house in Saint-Paul-de-Vence. The medieval village of Saint-Paul-de-Vence, usually known by its full name, as there are 9 other Saint-Pauls in France, resonates for the French. Today, it is a tourist mecca, a must-see stop on any visit to the Côte d'Azur. The village was where Jimmy, as I called him, had taken up residence in 1970. Sam had arrived before I did, and when I passed through customs at Nice Airport to begin my stay, he was there to meet me. As usual, I'd come heavily laden with my suitcase packed for every eventuality, and anybody who knows me knows that I do not travel light, because I was scheduled to spend a week with Sam at Baldwin's house, and I was rigid with apprehension and anticipation. A drive through the vertiginous, twisting roads like the ones in the film To Catch a Thief is all that I remember, along with the road signs. It's difficult to describe the house because it was actually several buildings with the typical plastered stone and red-tiled roofs of the Provençal countryside, including a gatehouse at the entrance on the road in which Bernard Hassel, Jimmy's friend and self-appointed guardian, fittingly lived. A tall, lean, former dancer, Bernard could be formidable and delighted in being terribly grand. In Saint-Paul, he was Baldwin's first line of defense, his friend, bodyguard, amanuensis, and Cerberus. Baldwin had never lost his African-American palate, and I love in the film where he said he missed the style of Harlem, he missed the style of home. Well, he also missed some of the food of home. And I had been informed, loved hot sauce that he could not get in France. Tabasco would not do. I'd been instructed that this would be the most welcome gift I could bring Jimmy, and so the 2 most precious items in my suitcase were huge bottles of Red Devil hot sauce. With the inevitability of fate, one shattered, and I spent the rest of my extraordinary week rinsing glass shards and red pepper out of my clothes. I met Jimmy briefly in New York on a few occasions, and I certainly knew of the great affection he and Sam had for each other. Sam called him Jimmy, and he called Sam teasingly, Sammy. A lèse-majesté Sam would have permitted no one else but one that he loved, for it signaled their special relationship. This, though, was different. I was at Jimmy's home, and he was relaxed and at rest, albeit a rest that was all about work. It was a view of Baldwin few saw, and I was very aware of the singular honor it bestowed. Soon enough, Jimmy arrived, febrile, intense, and terrifyingly impressive. By this time, Baldwin's visage had become so iconic that its familiarity was startling. But there he was in the flesh. and then he smiled. Oh, that smile. It lit up his entire being and revealed not only his huge capacity for joy, but also the hurt that lay just beneath the skin. It was a knowing smile, a wise smile, a smile of welcome with immense generosity for the naive, so out of my depth young woman that I was. He led us to a table set out among the towering cypress trees where lunch had been set, which Jimmy would later refer to as his welcome table, speaking of the old spiritual. The meal was simple: loaves of crusty French bread, a red wine from the region, probably a Bondol, and a tureen filled with a hearty soup au pistou prepared by Valerie Sordello, Baldwin's housekeeper and cook. Baldwin ate, chatted, and then vanished. I would learn that Baldwin disappeared during the day down to his room, which he referred to as his torture chamber. He composed on yellow pads, but by the time I arrived, he was working on his final edits, so the sound of the typewriter could be heard. When things were going well, it was a steady sound. And when it stopped, it was noticed. He'd reappear for lunch and for cocktails, dinner, or whatever else was going on in the evening before descending again. And I think this is the point at which I should let you all go home. Have a good evening. I thank you for your attention and your kindness, and have a good evening.